We are in our series At the Movies, and we're doing something a little bit different this year. If you've been here in previous years, this year we are actually looking at popular movies throughout the decades. And so each week we're looking at a different decade. Last week we kicked it off in the 50s, and we talked about Cinderella, and Pastor Sam brought an amazing message talking about enlarging our vision. And we talked about how we enlarge our vision by getting a bigger view, by getting around bigger people, and by getting a bigger faith. And each and every week we're talking about different keys to unlock your best summer ever. And so last week, the first key that we talked about, it was all about enlarging your vision. And if you missed that message, you did not get a chance to hear that, you can check that out on our church website, on YouTube, in the church app, the podcast. We have many different ways, and I'd encourage you to check that out. And so last week, Pastor Sam, he teased a little bit kind of what we're going to be talking about this week. And he shared that we're going to be talking about the sound of music. And I just want to be real with you. If you were here last week, I'm kind of disappointed in you. And here's why. Because at one point in the message, Pastor Sam asked, hey, do you think that Pastor Jason, I can't even say my own name, Pastor Jason should sing his message next week? I thought we were friends. You guys turned your back on me, and you got all excited saying, yes, you should sing this message. No, it's not going to happen. That is the worst possible idea. Like, you saw Pastor Sam up there trying to sing. I'm even worse than that. And so you do not want to hear me sing anything during this message. And even though I don't sing, I will say I do like The Sound of Music. It is one of my favorite musicals of all time, basically because it's one of the only ones that's bearable to watch. And so that's just kind of by default, it puts it in one of my favorite musicals of all time. So if you've never seen The Sound of Music, and I'm just going to give a real quick kind of plot summary. And if I ruin anything for you, well, you've had over 50 years to watch it, and so I don't feel too bad. So in the 1930s Austria, a young woman named Maria is failing miserably in her attempts to become a nun. When the Navy captain, George von Trapp, writes to the convent asking for a governess that can handle his 7 mischievous children, Maria is given the job. The captain's wife has passed away. He's often away and runs the household as strictly as he does the ships that he sails on. The children are unhappy and resentful of the governesses that their father keeps hiring, and they've managed to run each of them off one by one. When Maria arrives, she initially is met with the same hostility, but her kindness, understanding, and sense of fun soon draws them to her and brings a much-needed joy and happiness into their lives, including the captain's. Eventually, he and Maria find themselves falling in love. And even though Captain George is already engaged to a baroness, Maria is still a postulant. The romance makes them both start to question the decisions that they've made in their lives. Their personal conflicts soon become overshadowed, however, by world events. Due to the captain's unwillingness to serve in the Third Reich, the captain and Maria resolve to leave Austria. And after escaping the pursuit of some Nazi officers, they set out with their children to the mountains of Switzerland. So over the next few moments, as we're here together, I want to give you the second key to unlocking the best summer ever. And the second key is this: choose to be happy. Choose to be happy. The definition of happiness, according to Webster's dictionary, it means good fortune, prosperity, a state of well-being and contentment, joy, or pleasurable or satisfying experience. The wisest man in all of history was a man by the name of King Solomon. There were kings and queens at that time who'd travel all around the world to come to hear King Solomon's wisdom. They'd bring him their problems and their questions that they had about life, and they'd just sit at his feet and just listen to the wisdom that he had. And so the smartest man of all time, King Solomon, he had this to say about happiness. He said, I know that there is nothing better for people than to be happy and to do good while they live. And I think deep down we understand that. I think deep down that is our desire. We want to be happy and we want to do good for other people. But at the same time, as we go through life, we kind of struggle with this idea of, yeah, but look at my circumstance. Look at the situation that I'm in. Like all I see is lack, and all I see is, just difficult times in my life. Yeah, I want to choose happiness, but all I can focus on is my lack. And at the same time, we start to get frustrated and annoyed. And so we end up choosing anything but happiness in our lives. And today I want to share with you a few thoughts about how to have happiness in your life and how to choose today to be more happy. How many of you guys want to be happy in your life? Here in the house, tuning in online, we've got a couple hands. I think probably everybody, though, wants to be happy in their life. And so I think it's important from the very beginning that we understand this, that God made us to be happy. You see, as God knit us together in our mother's womb, He didn't place within inside of the genetic makeup of some of us a gene that's just like, man, this person is going to be miserable. So they have the miserable gene. And then in other people, they can be happy and they have the happy gene. No, that's not how God created us. He created each and every one of us to be happy. Now, that doesn't mean that everything in life is going to be raindrops on roses and whiskers on kittens, and you get to experience a few of your favorite things. It's as close as I'm getting to singing, by the way. It's as close as it comes. And just for the younger generation here, I think it's important that we note that this was in the Sound of Music way before it was an Ariana Grande song. And so I think for your life, you just need to know that factoid. But anyway, so God made us to be happy. But that doesn't mean that we're going to live one massive vacation lifestyle where everything just falls into place and everything is great all the time. You see, we were created to be happy, but that happiness is not based off of our circumstance. It's actually based off of a relationship with God. You see, we were created to have a relationship with Him. And through that relationship, we're able to choose happiness no matter what the situation and no matter what the circumstance. A man who knew about this happiness and the joy that comes through a relationship with God is a man by the name of King David. And honestly, King David, he went through it in his life. He had difficult seasons. From a really young age, he was anointed and appointed to become a king. But a few years later, he finds himself fleeing from the king who's trying to kill him. He runs out of town. He's hiding in caves and in mountains, just trying to live for the next day. And I'm assuming as he's sitting in one of those caves, he's thinking about, man, I was supposed to be king. Like, how am I here in this cave right now, like far from where I thought my life's trajectory was headed? Finally, throughout his life, he actually does become king, as God says, and he becomes the king, and he realized that that's not super easy either. In fact, throughout his reign as king, there's many wars that happen, and during one of those wars, the Philistines, which is a group of people, they actually walk away with the Ark of God, and this doesn't necessarily mean a ton to some of us here today, but in that day, to the Israelites, the people that King David was leading, that was a huge deal. That was something that could tarnish King David's legacy for forever. And so in the midst of this trial, in the midst of this difficult season in life, King David, he writes this. He says, "May the righteous be glad and rejoice before God. May they be happy and joyful." King David, he also pens this in one of his Psalms. He says, "This is the day the Lord has made. I will rejoice and be glad in it." Notice he said, this is the day. Today is the day that we need to rejoice and be glad. There's no fine print saying that, all right, if this, and this happens in your life, then you're excused. You don't have to choose happiness. We all agree you deserve a day off. If there was ever a person who deserved a day off, it would have been David. Like, all right, we can all agree, all right, David, you deserve to be grumpy and miserable for a couple days because, you're just going through a tough season in life. But that's not what King David did. No, instead, he's like, I'm going to set my heart, I'm going to set my mind on God, and I'm going to choose happiness no matter what life looks like around me. Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verse 26, it says, "To the person who pleases him, God gives wisdom, knowledge, and happiness." You see, happiness is a gift from God that is for each and every one of us here today. So God made us to be happy, but if we want to experience true happiness, you can't be happy if you're pursuing it. If happiness is your goal and that's what you're pursuing is happiness, it's not going to work out. Because like I mentioned earlier, it only comes through a relationship with God. We see this in Captain George Von Trapp as we're talking about the sound of music. We see this played out in his life because he seems to have what most of us have said as like, all right, if I just had a little bit more of that, then I'd be happy. Well, Captain George, he seems to have all of that. He's got money, he's got power, and he's got a position that is like held in high esteem by his country. He's got all those things that many of us say, well, if I just had a little bit more finances. He had the nicest house I've ever seen. It's beautiful, but he still wasn't happy. He's still miserable and just grumpy all the time. You see, it wasn't all of the things that he had collected in his life that made him happy. It's not our position, our possessions, or our power, but it's only through our personal relationship with God that we can experience happiness in our lives. Jim Carrey, the actor, once famously said, he said, I think everybody should get rich and be famous and do everything that they've ever dreamed of, so that way they can see that it's not the answer. We only find happiness when we pursue God's plan for our lives. My greatest piece of advice that I can give you in this process is to simply bloom where you're planted. You know, we might have to kind of change our perspective a little bit. We might have to say things like, you know what, it might look like and it might smell like manure all around me, but I'm going to choose to say that it's fertilizer and I'm going to grow in this season that God has me in here today. Your kids might be acting up. Your spouse might not kind of have the relationship with God that you'd want them to have, but don't let that steal your joy and your happiness in life. Choose today to instead say, you know what, God, in this season, I pray that you'd give me patience with them. I pray that you would kind of set that within inside of me, that each and every day I'd wake up and I'd pray for them. And even though they might not be open to hearing about how much you love them right now, God, give me opportunities to just share your love with my kids and with my spouse today. Maybe your finances are not looking the way that you had thought that they were. You're seeing lack in the natural, but instead of allowing it to steal your joy, instead stand on the promises of God and say, you know what, God, I'm going to continue to tithe. Even though I don't necessarily see the numbers in my bank account right now, I'm going to stand on your promise that said that if I test you in this, that you're going to open up the floodgates of heaven and you're going to pour out more than enough in my life. So God, I might not see it, but I'm not going to allow it to rob my happiness. I'm going to choose to follow your plans for my life. You see, I don't know what your life circumstance looks like, but I do know that if the chief goal in your life is happiness, that you're going to be upset. You're never going to find happiness if that is your chief goal in life. Eleanor Roosevelt, the former first lady, she said it this way. She said, happiness is not a goal, but it's simply a byproduct. My current reality does not determine my happiness, but my relationship with God does. So if you want this summer to be the best summer ever, then you have to choose to be happy. And you have to choose this decision. You have to make this decision over and over again. It's not just kind of like a set it and forget it kind of thing, but you have to continually choose happiness because the Bible says that the joy of the Lord is our strength. So when I read that, immediately I start thinking that, all right, so now I know that one of the enemy's main goals in my life is going to be my joy. Because if my strength of the Lord is determined off of my joy, then I know that that's what the enemy is going to come for in my life. When Maria first arrives at the Von Trapp household, she's filled with joy and happiness in her life. But then she meets these 7 crazy kids who are trying to run her off. And she has to make the decision each and every day, each and every time that one of these 7 kids tries to shoo her out the door, I'm going to choose to be happy. And I'm not just going to choose to be happy for my sake, but I'm going to choose to be happy for their sake as well. And I want them to be able to experience the joy and the happiness that I have in my life. And so she just kind of sets it in her mind that, you know what, even though these kids are going crazy, and there's 7 of them. I was complaining the other day about my one who was driving me crazy, and she's got 7 kids who are trying to run her out the door. She sets it in her mind that she is going to choose happiness. And that's exactly what she does. She chooses happiness, and then we see that throughout the movie that the children start to warm up to her. And we see that Captain George Von Trapp, he warms up to her as well, and they start to experience happiness again in their lives. Write down this key thought. It's that happiness is a decision that you make, not an emotion that you feel. You see, there are going to be some days where it's really easy to make that decision to be happy. But there's going to be other days that are really difficult to make that decision. Let me just tell you, yesterday, it was one of those days for me that I did not struggle to choose happiness. I had the opportunity to check something off of my bucket list that I didn't even know was on my bucket list. Because growing up in life, I like cars. Like, I enjoy cars. I don't really know much about fixing them or all that kind of fun stuff, but I know the ones that look sweet and go fast, and so that's my enjoyment of cars. And yesterday, I got to spend the day in a car that checked both of those boxes. It was yesterday that my friend invited me out to Pocono Raceway, and he has a awesome Mustang that he races, and he's like, hey, how about you come out with me to Pocono Raceway, and we're just going to spend the day racing around the racetrack. I said, all right, sounds good. Let me send my notes to Pastor Caleb in case if I don't make it back for Sunday, and we'll have fun. It'll be great. And so we went out there, and let me just tell you, as we're going 140 miles an hour around this racetrack, I was not sitting there thinking, man, Jason, just look for the positives. Like, try to think of something good that's going to come out of all of this. No, my only struggle was not to giggle like a little girl the whole way around that racetrack. Like, man, I was smiling the whole time I was there. It was amazing. I had so much fun. It was easy to choose happiness in that season, but there's always going to be those seasons, and there's going to be those times in life that come up where it's a little more difficult to choose your happiness. There's times where, again, you've got the kids who are acting crazy, or your spouse or your family. You're just kind of butting heads, and you're just struggling in this season of life. And can I encourage you, and no matter what the situation, no matter what the circumstance, to continue to choose happiness. I'll also admit that I failed at this the other week. See, the other week, Rachel and I, we took our son Corbin to the beach for a couple days, and we were going with Rachel's family. And it's a great idea in concept. We loved it. It was going to be great. It was great every other year. And so why wouldn't this year be great? Well, what changed is my son Corbin, who's a year and a half, he kind of crossed over this magical threshold of just kind of going with the flow to, like, all right, now he's got like normals in his life, and he's got like different things that he just kind of expects on a day-to-day. And his normal in life is being at home with mommy and daddy, and it's just the three of us. It's nice and peaceful around the house. And so we took him out of that normal, and we placed him in a house with 16 other people, and we said, good luck, little buddy. And he was miserable. It was not a few of his favorite things in life at that time. And so honestly, I had the opportunity. All right, am I going to choose to be happy? Am I going to choose to enjoy the fact that I'm on vacation? I'm sitting on a beach. Like, it's just like, it's relaxing. Or am I going to allow Corbin's like crying and being up at all hours of the night to kind of steal my happiness? I didn't choose happiness. I was just angry, I was frustrated, I was annoyed, and I allowed that to steal my happiness. And it happens. It happens in all of our lives where we miss those opportunities to choose happiness. But if we want to unlock the best summer ever, we have to make that choice. So the sometimes very difficult choice to choose happiness. Have you often realized how it's the little things that tend to steal our happiness? It's not the big things that kind of come up in life, but it's often just those little things. Maybe the boss gave you something new at work, and you're trying to figure this out, and you're kind of feeling a little bit of extra stress from this, and then you're driving home, and you get stuck behind a couple buggies, and you're just like, man, this is taking longer than it should, and you kind of allow that to annoy you, and then you get home, and you kind of pull up to your driveway, and the kids left their toys all over the driveway, so you got to clear all those off the driveway, and then you pull into your garage, and before you know it, you're kind of snapping at your kids, you're snapping at your spouse, and you've allowed these little minor inconveniences to steal your happiness. Habakkuk says that even though the fig trees have no blossoms, there are no grapes on the vines, and the olive crop fails, and the fields lie empty and barren, even though the flocks die in the fields and the cattle barns are empty, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will be joyful in the God of my salvation. You see, our natural tendency is to look at the lack. To look at the fact that, yeah, the olive trees and the fig blossoms, like none of this stuff is happening the way that it should. And we tend to focus on the negative. Some of those things are completely out of our control. And we just become like news reporters, just talking about all these things that are happening around us. But in the process of doing that, we choose to give up control of the one thing that we do have control over, which is our happiness. The Bible says that the steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord. And so if God is ordering your steps, it means that you're right where God has you. And you might not necessarily understand it. You might be like, man, this is painful. Like, this kind of hurts. God might be growing you and stretching you. He might be teaching you something through your situation, through your circumstance. Maybe God has you in that place that you're in right now, not necessarily for you, but actually for you to help somebody else through a difficult season that they're in as well. I don't necessarily understand it, and you might not either, but know that there is a God in heaven who has a plan and a purpose for your life, and he has your best interest at heart. The scripture says that since the Lord is directing our steps, why figure out everything that happens along the way? See, when we choose to be happy, I want to give you 5 different choices that we can make today in order for us to be happier. And first one is this. You might want to write this one down. Today, I choose to quit questioning God and start trusting him. It was about 6 or 7 years ago when I was asked by the church that I had been at previous to go through a church leadership class. And basically what that meant is I was going to go to another church and just like once a month for a year, I was going to sit through lectures through the entire weekend. And I'll be honest, like, I hated it. It was awful. Like, I couldn't stand going to these different classes. I was like, God, like, why do you have me here? Like, I feel like this is a waste of time, and I just don't want to be here. And there was one session that I was looking forward to throughout the entire year, and it was on the very last day, and it was by Pastor Jerry Stoltzfus, who's actually an overseer here at Freedom Life. And I had met him before, and so I was excited to just hear from him and just to connect with him afterwards. And so the day finally came. I made it through the 11 months of torture. I finally made it to the one thing that I was looking forward to. And so I'm there, and I'm talking with Pastor Jerry. And from that conversation, a domino effect of different events happened that actually led me to Freedom Life here today. Now, looking back on it, did I enjoy that leadership class that I was a part of? Absolutely not. I hated it. But am I glad that God had me there and used that so that way I could be in the season that I'm in here today? Absolutely. I wouldn't trade it for the world. You see, too often we try to figure it all out on our own, and we start questioning God instead of trusting him with our lives. Another way that you can choose to be more happy today is to no longer worry about the things that you can't change. You see, George Von Trapp, he's this captain, and he was just kind of miserable in life after losing his wife, which is understandable. You know, it's a very difficult thing to go through in life. But Captain George, he allowed that to actually affect everything else in his life. He still had 7 amazing kids at home who he had distanced himself from, that he had just kind of like pawned off on somebody else. He was trying to always bring in these different governesses, just take care of him so that way he can just go do his own thing. And it took Maria coming into his life and coming into the lives of these children in order for them to be able to experience that happiness and that joy again. You see, sometimes we just need to appreciate and not worry about the things that we can't change. There are going to be things in your life that happen to you that are out of your control, but that doesn't need to consume our focus. Instead of being news reporters on the things that we can't control, again, choose happiness. Choose to follow God and the plans that he has for us, and watch happiness and joy follow. The third thing that we have to choose is to begin appreciating what I have right now in order to be more happy today. You see, the comparison trap is something really easy for us to fall into. I remember soon after I graduated college, I was in a job as a youth pastor, and I was super happy with this role. I was very excited to have this role. And then a couple weeks later, my best friend, he got hired on, what I thought was like the dream job. All of a sudden, what I thought was, good and great and grand, all of a sudden now it's like, it's okay. It's not that great anymore. Man, I wish I had his job. Like, he's the one who's got the dream job. I wish I had his life. And for a while, I just got discouraged. I got frustrated. I got annoyed. I was like, man, why can't I have his job? Whenever anything would go wrong in my job, I bet he doesn't have that. And so I just got frustrated. And it took a while for me to kind of get my heart and get my head in alignment with God's word and just get into a place of appreciation again for all that God had blessed me with. It was a couple weeks later, kind of after I got myself back on track, that this exact same friend, he had somebody come to him who basically paid off all of his college debts, and is somebody that he didn't even know. And I'm like, all right, here we go. I know this is test number 2. I got it this time. And this time, instead of choosing bitterness, I chose to celebrate with my friend and be like, man, I'm so excited what God is doing in your life. Like, he has incredible things going on. And I chose happiness instead of bitterness. Can I tell you that is always the best decision, to choose happiness instead of bitterness? The next choice is to make a commitment to excellence. You may be wondering, what does excellence have to do with happiness? Well, our happiness is rooted in our relationship with God, and that's where it comes from. Everything that we do in life, we should be committed to excellence, because if we want God's very best in our life, if we want his blessings and favor in our lives, we have to be excellent in what he has called us to. God doesn't bless mediocrity. He blesses excellence, and it's those subtle compromises in integrity that keep us from God's very best. I heard a story about a wealthy businessman who he was friends with a builder. And this builder, he was just kind of down on his luck. He just couldn't catch a break. And so he couldn't get any work in. And so this wealthy businessman, he decided, all right, I'm going to bless my friend. And he wrote him a $300,000 check. And he said, all right, go and build me a dream home. And then if I walk through it in the end and I love it, I'll bless you again. But I don't have any time to kind of work on the details of this house. Like, you just go and you just make it happen. So the builder goes out and he starts constructing this house. And in the process, he realizes that this businessman, he doesn't know anything about building a house. So I can kind of cut some corners here and make it look beautiful, but he'll never know, and I can pocket the profits. So he goes out and he gets the cheapest concrete, he waters it down, makes it stretch further. He buys the cheapest wood that's crooked and bowed, and he just says, you know what, like, it'll just get covered up, it's not a big deal, like, I'll make it look good. He ends up pocketing about $40,000 in profit, and he takes the wealthy businessman to the house when it's all complete, and he says, take a look around, let me know what you think. As they tore through the house, the businessman, he gets this smile. It just gets bigger and bigger with every room that he walks through. He says, man, this is beautiful. This is amazing. I'm so excited about this house. And so as they're walking through, the builder, he's kind of getting in his head like, all right, he said he's going to bless me at the end of this, and he's loving it right now. So this is going to be good. Like, I can't wait to see what he does. At the end of the tour, the businessman, he looks at the builder and he says, this is an incredible house. Thank you so much for building this, but I already have an amazing house. And so I just wanted to bless you with the keys to this house. You just built yourself a new house. And the builder, he's kind of like backtracking real quick. And he's like, oh no, what have I done? And he's thinking like, all right, if I had known that this is what was going to happen, then I would have built this house completely differently. You see, we might not know it, but we're building a house called life. And when we cut corners and cheap out on integrity and excellence, it only affects ourselves. Finally, we need to make the choice to live with enthusiasm. Live with joy and happiness and energy in your life that draws other people to you. You know, we are called to be a light in a dark and depressed world. Be the Maria to the Von Trapps around you. For all those who are committed followers of Jesus, we're called to reflect his love to other people. We can't do that when we're walking around looking like Eeyore, depressed and just angry about life. Like, that's not going to bring people to Jesus. But when we live a life that says, you know what, I'm going to choose to be happy in the difficult situations, in the difficult circumstances, I'm going to choose happiness. It's going to draw people to you, and they're going to want what you have in life. One of our greatest strengths in life is our opportunity to choose happiness. Lasting happiness and joy, it only comes through our relationship with God. Would you please stand with me? As we close here today, I mentioned earlier that my wife Rachel and I, we went to the beach the other week, and kind of in the community that we were staying in, we were kind of bayside, and so at the back of the community, there was this awesome pier with all sorts of activities like paddleboarding and kayaking and stuff, and so we're kind of hanging out back there for one afternoon, and there was a family that came over in their boat. And they're just kind of hanging out there having fun, and I was just kind of watching them because they had a sweet boat, and I was just going to stay close in case they wanted to take me for a ride. Never happened, but I was just kind of checking out their boat, and I noticed that, the winds were kind of picking up, and the waves were getting a little bit more choppy, and even through that, the boat remained exactly where they had parked it. Now, I know and you know it's because of the anchor that they had dropped deep in the waters. And the same thing is true for our lives. I was thinking about this as I was preparing this message, that there are going to be seasons and difficult things that come up in our lives that are going to kind of bring the waves and the wind. And if we're not careful, we can kind of drift back out into the ocean and just kind of get lost in our own world. But when our lives are anchored in a relationship with God, we can withstand the wind and we can withstand the waves because we can choose happiness based off of our relationship with Him.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to our online experience. It's our prayer that you experience the hope and the freedom in life that only God has to offer. I want to encourage you to take some next steps. Take what you've heard, put it into practice. We want to help you with that. Go ahead and email us at hope@freedom.life, and we'll help you with that next step. Thanks again for tuning in. Have a great week.